But we don't need a striker, do we, David Sullivan, do we? No, we're happy with the fucking injury Croc Carroll. I used to twat, I don't want to play in that fucking Ecuadorian donkey twat. No, we don't need a striker. We couldn't score against Astra Go!
The 25th of August 2016. After an incredible final season at Upton Park, West Ham United lost 1-0 at home to Romanian side Astra Gorju, who knocked them out the Europa League qualifying round for the second straight season. And despite high hopes going into a move to the London Stadium, this game would go on to be the lasting memory of European football at the ground for a long time. However, fast forward 7 years later, and I think it's fair to say that the Hammers were able to put this defeat behind them. This is the story of West Ham's incredible run to the Conference League final. Now, before I get onto this incredible campaign, I'd be doing the Hammers a disservice if I didn't at least mention their impressive European pedigree. Think back to 1965. England hadn't won a World Cup, some of the most iconic football moments of all time hadn't happened, and humans hadn't even reached the moon. But more importantly, West Ham had just become the second British side to ever win a European trophy, beating 1860 Munich 2-0 in the Cup Winners' Cup final in a game played at the legendary Wembley Stadium. A decade later, and they'd make the final once again, this time losing 4-2 to Anderlecht, before featuring in the competition again 5 years later despite being in the second tier of English football. Now, each of these stories are massively interesting and I should really delve a bit deeper into them, but just to keep this video as concise and waffle-free as possible, I'll fast forward to that final season at Upton Park 35 years later. The previous campaign had seen West Ham top the fair play table, meaning they'd qualified for the Europa League for the first time in 15 years, where, as I mentioned, they'd been knocked out before the competition even got going by Romanian outfit Astra Gorju. Nonetheless, the performances of stars like Dimitri Payet fired the Hammers up to 7th, where they'd qualified for the Europa League once again, and I think we all know what happened there. It would also be during the summer before the 16-17 campaign where it seemed like the mentality switched behind the scenes at the club, as they disregarded many of the qualities that had helped them build to be in their strong position. As well as the stadium move, West Ham's transfer strategy seemed to shift, purchasing players from some of Europe's elite clubs like Juventus and Real Madrid, rather than the shrewd signings which had built their current squad, as the Hammers saw repeated disappointing campaigns, with David Moyes even being hired to save them from relegation in 17-18. Former Man City and Real Madrid manager Manuel Pellegrini was then hired in the summer, failing to really progress the squad before being sacked and replaced by David Moyes again in December 2019 with the club in the relegation zone. It would be this moment that would go on to shape West Ham's rise over the following years, not only with results on the pitch but also their ethos off it, as player signings became smart and thought out once again. Mikel Antonio would fire the Hammers to safety before the following season saw West Ham finish in 6th place and qualify for the Europa League for the first time in 5 years, with recent signings like Jared Bowen, Thomas Souček, Craig Dawson and Vladimir Coufal all playing a huge role. They would then start the next season on fire, flying high in the Prem as well as topping a relatively tricky Europa League group, before an incredible comeback win against Sevilla and a crazy night in Lyon saw them prove their doubters wrong and make the semi-finals of the competition. In the end, an Aaron Cresswell red card would end all hopes of another European final. However, after finishing 7th, they'd once again qualify for Europe against the odds, this time the Conference League. The summer would then see a big spend in order to prevent the burnout seen towards the end of the previous campaign, with Lucas Paqueta, Nayef Aguerd and Gianluca Scamacca being amongst a remarkable 10 new signings, with hopes high going into the new season. Q5 losses from their opening 7 games, seeing them sat in the relegation zone, having scored just 3 league goals all season. Luckily for David Moyes though, his side would beat Danish side Viborg in the qualifiers before then going flawless throughout the group stage, just about keeping him in a job going into the World Cup break. You see, as I mentioned earlier, West Ham's form in the second half of last season completely fell off a cliff, with a run of just 1 win in their final 7 games being covered up by the fact they progressed so far in the Europa League and started the season so well. However, with 23 games gone this season, the Hammers were still in the drop zone, with summer signings failing to live up to expectations completely. Lucas Paqueta and Gianluca Scamacca were both signed to fix holes in the opponent's half. However, upon arrival, the Brazilian turned out to perform far better as an 8, with £35 million man Scamacca limited to just a handful of starts. Luckily for them though, the Conference League would return in March, with West Ham winning 6-0 over 2 legs against Cypriot side Larnaca in the last 16. Their victories in Europe also helped build form in the league as well, pulling them away from the drop zone slightly, before the Conference League quarter-final draw saw them fortunate enough to be on the opposite side to Italian giants Fiorentina, who they wouldn't be able to play until the final if both teams were to progress. Before they could think of any final though, the Irons were on the road once again, or more literally the air I guess, as they travelled to Belgium to face up against giants Ghent. A first half Danny Ings goal would be cancelled out by an equaliser for the home side, with everything to play for, and was expected to be a tough match at the London Stadium. 26 minutes in and West Ham found themselves a goal down, however what came next was incredible.
Chance for an equaliser from this set piece. Oh, it finds the head! Paquetá steps up to the ball, stutters somewhat. Paquetá again. Mikel Antonio might be waiting for a cross from Rice, but he still goes. Ball with Mikel Antonio. Still with Antonio. Comes in. Antonio! That's European semi-final.
Having brushed Ghent aside, West Ham would face up against a tough AZ Alkmaar side in the semis, whose best chance of Europa League qualification was through winning the tournament. But before I go into that semi-final clash, I just need to ask everyone watching one thing. As you can see on screen, the last 3 videos on this channel have seen around 95% of viewers not being subscribed, and so if you're watching this and have enjoyed it so far, a like and subscribe would go a huge way in the growth of this channel. Okay, that's enough, back onto the video. Going into the first leg, the Hammers were given a boost in the form of an unexpected 1-0 win against Man United, all but securing their Premier League safety, meaning they could give everything across the upcoming fixtures. West Ham would host the first leg where they once again found themselves behind, however 2 goals in 8 minutes gave them a vital 1-goal cushion going into the second clash. Everything wasn't rosy though, as AZ Alkmaar won every single one of their 7 home games in the Conference League, some by extraordinary scorelines, even knocking out favourites for the whole tournament Lazio in the process, and so the Dutch side was still far from hopeless.
Working onto that left foot, curling effort off the post. On it, might roll to De Witt, curling across to the far post. Kerr is there. Oh, he nearly knocked it into his own net. Keep Alkmaar away from their goal, and they've done that. And Pablo Fornals bringing the ball forward, hits it with his right foot, finds the bottom corner, and they've come here to Alkmaar and beaten them, and they'll be in the final.
A tense game ended in celebrations and then quickly feared for the West Ham players and fans, with a number of Dutch hooligans attacking the family of the players. However, nonetheless, West Ham had progressed through to their first European final in almost 50 years. Just for reference there, referee Anthony Taylor was born, grew up, refereed for over 20 years, and was then able to make a European final appearance before West Ham could. And as I covered, recent years had been a little bit painful for West Ham fans, from poor spending on disappointing signings and even managerial appointments to a move away from their home. They even had to watch local rivals Leyton Orient become the greatest team of all time. However, things have improved in recent years, and despite the fact that this has probably been the worst Premier League season in David Moyes' time in charge, West Ham could potentially finish with their first major trophy in 43 years. Things won't be easy though, as they'll face up against 2-time Serie A and 6-time Coppa Italia winners Fiorentina in the final, who themselves just missed out on European spots in the league, meaning that both sides will have to give everything if they want to win. But if the Hammers are able to overcome one final hurdle, they'll see a season in which they've spent significant spells in the relegation zone become immortalised in their fans' memories forever. A win in the 18,000-seater Fortuna Arena wouldn't quite be as glamorous as their Wembley victory way back when, but I'm sure if you asked any West Ham fan watching, victory in Prague would most certainly do.